The snap of a whip, the sound of shackles, and then quiet. A young girl stood barefoot on the wooden platform under the scorching Texas sun, her wrists chained by rusting iron. As if they were selecting livestock, the crowd gazed at her. The auctioneer smiled. Sweat trickled down his throat. Shadowy auctions like this continued to flourish in secret barns, where desperate people were sold off like old debts to avoid the law, even 4 years after the Civil War ended slavery. The next one, 17, no family, no husband. Sold 3 times already. Won't work and won't speak. $5 to begin. A quiet girl like her appeared useless in an era when people sought strong backs for farm labor. Too damaged by the aftermath of the conflict to sell for more than a few pennies. Nobody said anything. In the front, a man spat in the ground. Not worth a single penny. Lena Cartwright was the girl's name. Her gown was in ruins. Her skin was covered in dust. The bruise on her cheek was concealed by her hair sticking to her face. She gazed at the floor, immobile. She had long since ceased crying. Here, crying never made a difference. Then a steady, deep and serene voice. I'll give you 20. People's heads turned. A man with a shabby brown coat and a bunch of crumpled cash stood at the rear of the crowd. Grant McCade was his name, and he was 56 years old. His jaw was covered in gray stubble. A man who appeared to have not grinned in 10 years. The auctioneer gave a blink. $20? Are you certain? Mr. Grant gave a single nod. The gavel crashed into the ground. Sold. Lena remained still. She avoided even glancing at him. Grant took off his hat and moved closer. His heart stopped as he saw her face clearly. 8 years ago, she had a tiny crescent scar on her wrist. He had personally bandaged the wound. He recalled the young child hiding behind her father's leg, inquiring as to whether it would make an impression. He had lied when he told her no. Lena was pushed forward by the auctioneer. Before she could fall, Grant caught her. Her skin was scorching. For the first time, her eyes were green but hollow as she glanced up at him. In a whisper, he said, "Lena." Her face remained unchanged. Her eyes flickered like if a half-buried recollection from before the war had stolen everything, but she ignored it. People in her position quickly learnt not to put their trust in familiar faces. She had no recollection of him. Perhaps she did, but wished she hadn't. The sound of the gavel reverberated outside due to the wind. One more life sold, one more soul lost. Grant walked away with the girl, who hadn't spoken to him in years, after counting his remaining coins and placing them in the man's palm. Grant didn't. Under a ruthless sky, the gravel road stretched out. He was reminded of his debt by the gentle clinking of Lena's shackles as she trailed him by a few steps. He was unsure if she would ever comprehend the reason for his actions. Perhaps she wouldn't, but he could feel the past breathing down his neck as the barn door slammed behind them. His father's avarice had condemned the Cartwright family 8 years prior. The remaining member of that family now walked behind him, broken, mute, yet still alive. The sun began to set. Around their feet, dust rose. Grant was aware that until he told her the truth about cowboy love stories, the ghosts of that day would accompany him. However, how can you beg someone who doesn't even know who you are for forgiveness? Dust rose beneath the horses' hooves on the miles-long road. Grant stopped the horses as soon as they left the barn, took a key out of his pocket, and released her chains. He mumbled, "No one should wear these in a free country," recalling the post-war pledges made by Union soldiers. The sun beat down hard, baking the dirt until it cracked. Grant was a slow rider. The girl on a smaller mare behind him was silent and lowered her head. The only sound was the constant clinking of the chains that were still fastened to her wrist. Her terror was like burning to him. She never glanced at him, instead staring at the floor when he turned to look back. They came to a stop next to a large oak tree. For kilometers, its shade is the only cool place. After getting down, Grant tethered the horses and took a small canteen out of his saddlebag. He approached, being cautious not to approach too closely. "Here," he murmured. Observing him as if he could attack her, she hesitated. Her fingers shaking, she finally grabbed for it. She grasped the canteen tightly, assessing him before lowering her guard. her eyes narrowing as if she had witnessed too many fake kindnesses since the end of the war. For the first time, she glanced directly at him after taking a sip and wiping her mouth. Although her voice was soft, it had enough edge to pierce bone. She remarked, "I guess you got what you paid for." "Do what you want." Western narratives. Grant froze. He stopped breathing for a considerable amount of time. The words were more painful than a bullet. He carefully knelt down so she could see that his hands were empty. "I didn't buy you to own you," he declared. "I just didn't want to see them sell you again." She gave a quick, dry, bitter laugh. "Do you believe that improves it?" He didn't respond. There was no response that would seem appropriate. There was silence between them as they sat there in the heat. With the dust adhering to the perspiration on his hands, Grant gazed at his footwear. "I knew your family," he finally replied. "Your dad was a decent man. When they came for him, I ought to have done more." Lena averted her gaze. She had a flat voice. "Everyone claims that the wind increased after it was too late, shaking the branches above them." She got up and began to walk back to her horse while still clutching the canteen. She was not stopped by Grant. Knowing that he had earned every bit of her rage with the Wild West Stories podcast, he simply watched. Grant slipped his hat back on and trailed behind. Like a heartbeat struggling to recall its rhythm, the sound of hooves reverberated over the hills, steady and hollow. He questioned whether she would ever cease viewing him as the adversary, and how far it would take. And one idea continued to burn someplace in that quiet. When she discovered the truth, what would she do? The sun was setting behind the hills by the time they arrived at the ranch. Even the wind appeared weary as the land spread out in silence and emptiness. Grant showed Lena the tiny hut, untied the horses, and gave her a piece of bread. "Within," he uttered plainly. Her gaze darted to the frigid stove and the lone bed as she paused. Then, like a stray dog testing the ground, she moved cautiously and slowly. The ranch was quiet for a few days. Lena toiled silently, cleaning the floor till her hands broke, hauling water and feeding the horses. In addition to mending the roof and fixing fences, Grant made an effort not to keep a close eye on her. They shared the same earth and lived like two ghosts. But there was never much quiet out here. 3 riders approached the road on the 3rd day. Grant first noticed the dust, and then he noticed a badge glinting in the sun. The man who had previously referred to himself as the protector of justice was Sheriff Dalton. The Cartwright farm was set on fire by soldiers under the command of the same individual. Dalton dismounted slowly while grinning. "Well, if it ain't Grant McSee." His gaze moved from Grant to the girl who was standing behind the gate. He narrowed his eyes at her wrist scar, the one from that fatal night 8 years ago, and for a moment his smile vanished. In some areas, old secrets from the war era were difficult to bury. "Now that's a face I thought I'd never see again." Lena's knuckles whitened around the wooden rail as she froze. Grant moved in between them. "You've had your look," he said. Dalton chuckled. "Grant, are you now purchasing lost females in Western romantic films? Did she come to keep you warm at night?" Grant remained unflinching. However, the atmosphere shifted, the quiet that preceded a gunshot. Grant remarked, his voice firm and quiet, "I paid for her freedom, not her body." With his hand on the revolver at his hip, Dalton moved forward slowly. "That's really admirable of you, but you know I recognize that name, Cartwright. Her father was a betrayer. Recall that he had used the same old falsehood to defend the raid, recruiting sincere farmers and traders to the Union cause in order to seize their land amid the mayhem that followed the Appomattox." Lena's breath caught. Her thoughts returned to that night's fires as she tightened her grip on the rail. Though she knew that silence had kept her alive this long in a society still recovering from the war, she still wanted to spit the truth at him. Grant clenched his jaw. He declared, "She's under my protection." After chuckling, Dalton took a single bullet out of his pocket. He set it on the fence post that separated them. He whispered, "A reminder, Grant. Some spirits do not remain underground." The dust they left behind felt heavier than before when they eventually rode off. Lena took the bullet and rotated it in her palm. "Who was that?" she whispered. Grant remained silent. "Not yet. He simply gazed at the setting sun. He knew this wasn't the end, so the memory of the fire and scream continued to sear in his head, and blood would follow Dalton's return. Pour yourself a cup of tea, relax, and take in the story if you have followed me this far. Tell me what time it is in your location. From where are you listening? Click the subscribe button to ensure you don't miss the next part if you want to know what happens when the truth is eventually revealed. The wind was stronger than usual that evening, the kind that brought back memories and the scent of rain. The light danced on the rough wood walls as Grant sat by the cabin's little fire. With her face partially obscured by shadow, Eileen sat across from him, silent as ever. Since Dalton's visit, neither has communicated. However, the truth can be forced out by quiet. Lena eventually took something out of her pocket and set it down on the table. A little worn-out silver pocket watch. Its back had a slight carving of the initials R. She shoved it in his direction. "Do you recognize it?" Silently she inquired. Grant's hand stopped in its tracks. He was aware of it. Cartwright Robert, her dad. After the raid, I discovered it in a backpack that had been abandoned. I kept it for 8 years, hiding it, she claimed. I made sure no one ever touched the new homes they sold me, whispering, "It was the final gift P gave me before the army arrived. Keep this safe, Lena." A memory of the family that, like many others in the South, was split apart by the war. Her eyes were wet yet piercing as she gazed up at him. "You knew him, didn't you?" Grant took a deep breath. His voice sounded harsh. "I did." "Then tell me the truth," Lena said, bending forward. "What actually took place that evening?" Grant gazed at the flames for a considerable amount of time. They twisted and flickered. At last he spoke like ghosts dancing. "Every word is weighty and slow. After the war, your family's land was sold by my father. I heard him telling the soldiers. I rode to alert you to your position. However, it was too late. Everything was on fire. I was a coward. They didn't live, but I did." Lena remained silent. She clasped her palm around the watch after reaching for it. Her fingers trembled and her knuckles turned white as if she wanted to throw it into the fire and forget. But the memories clung to her, reminiscent of her family's pre-war dreams of a better America. "Do you believe it's better to tell me this?" she inquired. "No," he muttered. "It doesn't. However, you should be aware of who you are standing next to." They sat there for a long time. Outside, the fire was hissing between them. Like the earth recalling what they had tried to forget, thunder rolled across the hills. At last, Lena spoke once again, her voice barely audible. "Why are you the one carrying the guilt if your father did all that?" Grant raised his head, his gaze steady yet weary. "Because I was present, since I didn't do anything. Additionally, I continue to breathe when they do not." The fire flickered again. Lena gave him a look, and she appeared to lose her wrath for the first time since they first met. Just cracked, not gone. It was as if something within her was attempting to comprehend. However, a sound emerged from the storm outside before she could say anything more. The sound of hooves. "Quick, close." Grant grabbed his gun, because the past doesn't always knock twice. The crackle of the dying fire was all that remained after the sound of hooves receded into the distance. With his rifle still in hand and his gaze fixed on the pouring rain outside, Grant stood by the entrance. With the silver watch still tightly gripped, Lena sat close to the hearth. Neither of them said anything, but the quiet was different now. It was heavy with everything that had been spoken rather than icy or angry. The storm had passed before dawn. The property was bathed in gentle light as the sky was cleansed. With firm hands and a sore back from years of labor and sorrow, Grant set out to repair the damaged fence. At first, he didn't hear Lena until she spoke from behind him. "You're not doing things correctly." She spoke in a dry, almost playful tone. He pivoted. Her hair was disheveled, her dress was still wet from the rain, and she was carrying the hammer. She approached him and began assisting him without saying anything more. They spent hours working side by side. There was only the sound of the wind and wood, and something started to shift in that subdued pace. It felt almost like tranquility, but it wasn't love yet. Following that confession night, Grant began carving plain wooden planks because he believed Lena should have a place to honor her family, similar to the memorials that are being erected throughout the state in memory of the lost souls from the 4 wars. Grant constructed 2 little wooden crosses close to the fence line later that night. One was for Robert Cartwright, while the other was just inscribed "Family." He carved the names by hand. Lena's eyes welled with emotions that she had been holding back for 8 long years when she saw it. She bent down next to the graves and used her fingertips to trace the letters. She then got up, approached him, and returned the watch to his grasp. "I think it's time you keep it," she murmured. He gave a head shake. "No, it belongs to them." She grinned, little, worn out but genuine. "Let it remain here after that." She didn't sleep in the area by the door that evening. Grant, who was seated across the room, suddenly felt like he could breathe again as she sat by the window and observed the stars. Weeks stretched out of days. Lena remained. When he stumbled in the mud one day, she gave him a board, planted seed, and repaired his clothes. Families rebuilding after the war are examples of small deeds that foster trust. The spirit that haunted the ranch gradually faded. Perhaps forgiveness is a gradual process. Perhaps it grows silently and slowly, much like grass pushes through scorched dirt, and perhaps that's what healing is, in fact. If you've ever carried too much remorse to put a name on it, how long will it take you to forgive yourself? Additionally, could you ever allow someone to injure you? Them attempt to put things right? Inhale deeply, pour yourself a cup of tea and consider that. To ensure you don't miss what happens next, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe if this tale resonated with you. Because sometimes people manage to find their way home, even in the most remote locations.